Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a listener request today, absurdist literature, with a special focus on Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot,
Ah, yes.
a classic.
It really is. And we have a ton of your notes to help guide us and some really interesting articles about the play and the context surrounding it and even its impact.
It's a play that continues to resonate, that's for sure.
It does. So, ready to explore a world where nothing happens.
Where nobody comes, nobody goes.
It's awful,
Well, on the surface.
but incredibly fascinating.
Right.
Right.
Beckett really captures that existential dread, but infuses it with this kind of dark humor. Really makes you think.
Yeah, and that's what's always intrigued me about absurdism. It's not just like doom and gloom.
Right.
There's this layer of humor, almost a coping mechanism, I think, for the absurdity of it all.
Exactly. You're laughing at the void because, well, what else can you do?
Yeah.
And Waiting for Godot really is a prime example of this. Two tramps endlessly waiting for someone named Godot who never actually arrives.
Right. So it's bleak and it's repetitive, but there's that humor that makes you question, like everything, the very nature of existence.
Right, and it's not like this genre just appeared out of thin air.
Right.
Our sources point to World War II as this major turning point.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
You got to imagine the world after the horrors of World War II.
Mhm.
Traditional values and beliefs completely shattered.
Yeah.
There's this widespread sense of disillusionment. So absurdist literature, it emerged from that collective trauma, questioning everything, like everything that humanity had previously held to be true.
So instead of neat narratives, we get these works that embrace the chaos.
The meaninglessness.
The meaninglessness, yeah.
Precisely. It throws the rule book right out the window. It rejects this whole idea of a rational universe, the notion that our lives have inherent meaning. And instead, it presents human existence as, well, kind of a fruitless search for purpose in a world that offers none.
It's making me think about Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus and that quote we have. In a universe suddenly deprived of illusions and light, man feels stranger. His is an irremediable exile. This divorce between man and his life, the actor and his setting, truly constitutes the feeling of absurdity.
Camus really nailed it with that one, didn't he? That feeling of being so out of place and exile in your own life, like the ground is shifted beneath your feet, and you're left grappling with this new awareness of your own insignificance.
Which brings us to Samuel Beckett and Waiting for Godot. What initially drew you to his work?
It's the audacity of it all. Presenting a play where on the surface nothing happens, but beneath that seemingly empty surface, there's this profound exploration of the human condition. He takes those huge existential questions that we often try to avoid, and he just throws them right in our faces.
And he does it in such a unique way. The play's lack of a traditional plot, the repetitive dialogue, the characters who seem trapped in this endless cycle of waiting. It's also deliberate.
Absolutely. It's deliberate. He's using these techniques to mirror the absurdist idea that life can feel like a meaningless cycle. We're all kind of like Vladimir and Estragon, just waiting for something to change, for some external force to give our lives meaning. But that change, well, it never really comes.
And speaking of Vladimir and Estragon, our source material really dives into these character descriptions. How do they embody these absurdist principles?
They're like two sides of the same existential coin, really. You have Vladimir, or Didi, as he's sometimes called, who's the more intellectual one. He's grappling with all those big philosophical questions.
Right.
And then you have Estragon, Gogo, more focused on his immediate needs, hunger, sleep, comfort, the basics.
It's almost like they represent two different approaches to coping with the absurdity of existence, right?
Yeah.
Vladimir with his endless pondering, Estragon with his, I guess, focus on these simple pleasures, but
Yeah.
neither approach seems to provide any real solace.
Exactly, and that's precisely the point. Beckett's not offering us solutions. He's presenting a dilemma. He's presenting the struggle and forcing us to confront it alongside his characters.
Right. Now let's talk about Pozzo and Lucky, that strange duo that kind of stumbles upon Vladimir and Estragon. What role do they play in this absurd world?
Well, Pozzo, at least initially, represents this illusion of power and control.
Okay.
He's leading Lucky around on a rope, treating him like a beast of burden.
Right.
But then in the second act, he returns blind, helpless, completely reliant on Lucky.
It's almost like a cruel joke.
Yeah.
The play seems to suggest that even those who appear to be in control are ultimately subject to the same forces of absurdity.
That's one way to look at it. And then you have Lucky, whose very name is, well, kind of ironic, right?
Yeah.
Enslaved, mistreated, yet he's the one who gets to deliver this long, rambling, nonsensical speech.
Oh, that monologue. It's one of the most fascinating and frustrating parts of the play. It's like an explosion of language,
Yeah.
but it ultimately signifies nothing. What do you make of it?
Some see it as this commentary on the limitations of intellectualism. Like, even our most profound thoughts can be meaningless when faced with the absurd. Others view it as this representation of the human need to make meaning, even when there's none to be found.
It's almost like Beckett is saying, here's language, our supposed tool for communication and understanding.
Right.
But what good is it when the world itself makes no sense?
You're getting it. And then, of course, you have the elusive Godot himself, that unseen figure who never actually arrives.
He could represent so many things. God, salvation, meaning maybe even death.
It's up to the audience to decide, and that ambiguity is part of what makes the plays so powerful, so thought-provoking. Beckett's not giving us any easy answers. He's not telling us what to think. He's encouraging us to think for ourselves.
To grapple with the absurdity, the uncertainty, and maybe find some, I don't know, some strange kind of solace in the shared experience of questioning.
Precisely. And this brings us to another fascinating aspect of Waiting for Godot, Beckett's use of language, which is just as unconventional and thought-provoking as his storytelling.
Okay. Let's dive into that then. This deep dive wouldn't be complete without exploring the unique way Beckett uses language to kind of mirror the absurdity he's portraying. So we're diving deeper into the language of Waiting for Godot. I'm really curious about this.
It's fascinating how Beckett uses language to, in a way, dismantle language itself, like he's exposing its limitations in the face of the absurd.
Yeah, and in our sources, you highlighted this repetition, this cyclical dialogue, those phrases like on a loop, just like Vladimir and Estragon are stuck waiting. It's almost claustrophobic, wouldn't you say?
Exactly. It's not just mirroring their monotonous existence. The repetition creates this sense of being trapped, not physically on that desolate road, but trapped by their thoughts, their inability to escape the cycle.
And the conversations themselves, they're so fragmented, illogical. Sentences left unfinished, contradictions, tangents that lead nowhere. What's the significance of all of this? It feels so intentional.
It is absolutely intentional, and Beckett's highlighting the difficulty, or maybe even the futility, of true communication.
Yeah.
They talk, but do they really connect? It makes you wonder how often we really say what we mean, if we even understand each other at all.
So it's not just about the meaninglessness of their individual lives, but also this breakdown of connection between people. Like even language, our supposed bridge to one another, fails in the face of the absurd.
Exactly, and that's where the wordplay comes in, as we noted in your source material. The puns, those moments like when Pozzo claims to be blind and then immediately questions it. It's like Beckett is playing with us with the very notion of truth.
So it's not just reflecting the absurdity of their situation, but almost making the audience complicit in it. Like, we're questioning everything alongside the characters, even our own ability to perceive reality.
Right, and by using language in this unconventional way, Beckett draws attention to one of the key themes of Waiting for Godot, which is this failure of communication.
And it feels like that failure goes even deeper than just miscommunication between the characters, right? It's like a fundamental disconnect between human beings and the universe itself. Like, they're trying to understand, trying to find meaning, but language just isn't equipped to handle those huge existential questions.
I completely agree. And that brings us to the play's wider context, its roots in the theater of the absurd, the existentialist philosophy that really influenced Beckett.
So before we get into the impact of Waiting for Godot, it seems like it would be helpful to understand where Beckett was coming from, both in terms of, his theatrical influences and those philosophical underpinnings.
Definitely. Waiting for Godot didn't just emerge in a vacuum. We know from your sources that Beckett was influenced by earlier absurdist works, like Alfred Jarry's Ubu Roi, and that kind of paved the way for this unconventional theater.
And then you have movements like Expressionism, Surrealism. They had an impact, didn't they? That focus on the subconscious, the irrational, the dreamlike. It seems to resonate in Beckett's work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Those movements, they challenge traditional notions of reality, of representation. And that's something that Beckett's also doing in Waiting for Godot. He's not interested in presenting some realistic portrayal of life, but rather an exploration of this inner experience of being human in all its complexity and absurdity.
And of course, we can't talk about Beckett without talking about existentialism. We mentioned Camus earlier, but Sartre's influence is huge too, right? Especially those ideas about like freedom, choice, the meaninglessness of existence.
Exactly. Existentialism is all about those huge questions. What is the meaning of life? Do we have free will? How do we cope with knowing that we are ultimately responsible for creating our own meaning in a world that seems to offer none? Waiting for Godot is a theatrical embodiment of those very questions.
You mentioned meaninglessness of life. It's a theme that runs throughout the play, isn't it? They're literally waiting for something that never comes, almost symbolizing the futility of searching for meaning outside ourselves.
It's the perfect theatrical representation of Camus's concept of the absurd. That clash between our human desire for meaning and the universe's apparent indifference. And you noted in your research how this theme really resonated with you personally.
It's true. With all the pressures and expectations in today's world, that sense of waiting for something to change, waiting for something to give our lives purpose, it just feels so relatable. Like we're all waiting for our own Godot who may never arrive.
And yet, even within that meaninglessness, that lack of resolution, there's also this strange kind of comfort. Beckett isn't offering answers, but he's acknowledging this shared human experience of this existential dilemma.
It's like he's saying, look, I don't know what it all means either, but at least we're in this together.
Exactly. And that recognition, that sense of shared absurdity, it can be really powerful. It can create this sense of solidarity, of connection, even in the face of despair.
That's a really thought-provoking point. It makes me think about the ending of the play, how Vladimir and Estragon decide to leave, but they don't move. They're trapped in this cycle of inaction. Yet there's this strange sense of camaraderie between them.
It's like their shared waiting, their shared struggle has created a bond that, while maybe not fulfilling, is at least something. They have each other, even if they have nothing else.
So while the play is undeniably bleak, there's this undercurrent of hope, or at least resilience, in the simple act of being together, of facing the absurd side by side.
It's a subtle but profound message, and it's part of what makes Waiting for Godot such an enduring work of art.
And speaking of enduring, I want to touch on the play's impact and legacy. It didn't just premiere and fade away, it really shook up the theatrical landscape, didn't it?
Oh, it was a game changer. Waiting for Godot challenged everything audiences had come to expect from theater, broke the rules, pushed boundaries, opened up a whole new world of possibilities for playwrights.
Our sources mention a few names that were inspired by Beckett and the theater of the absurd: Harold Pinter, Edward Albee, Tom Stoppard. Did their work have a similar impact?
Absolutely. Pinter, with his mastery of silence and the unspoken, created these incredibly unsettling and thought-provoking plays. Albee explored these dark undercurrents of American family life in a way that was both realistic and absurdist. And Stoppard, well, he took those theatrical conventions and just turned them on their head, created works that were both intellectually stimulating and wildly entertaining.
It's incredible to think that one play could spark this whole wave of creative innovation. What do you think is the key to Waiting for Godot's lasting impact? Why does it continue to resonate with audiences even decades later?
I think it goes back to those core themes we've been discussing. The search for meaning, the struggle to communicate, the feeling of being lost and alone in a world that can often feel absurd. These are timeless human experiences. They transcend any particular time period or cultural context.
Especially in a world that's constantly bombarding us with information, expectations, pressure. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, lost in the noise. Waiting for Godot provides this space to confront those feelings, to acknowledge that maybe it's okay not to have all the answers.
And maybe even to find a strange kind of comfort in the shared experience of not knowing. Beckett's play doesn't offer solutions, but it does offer this sense of solidarity, a recognition that we're all in this absurd existence together.
And maybe, just maybe, there's a glimmer of hope in that.
Absolutely. The hope lies not in finding Godot, but in finding each other, in connecting, in sharing this journey through the absurdity, even if we don't know where it's leading.
And now that we've kind of explored these deeper themes, let's circle back to Beckett's use of language in Waiting for Godot, because it plays such a crucial role in conveying these ideas. It's more than just dialogue. It's almost like another character in the play.
Exactly. The way Beckett uses language to both illuminate and obscure meaning is really central to understanding the play's overall impact.
It really is. And it's something that you picked up on in your notes, the repetition. It's everywhere.
It is. It's like this broken record.
Yeah.
In a way that's both frustrating and fascinating.
Right.
Like when Vladimir keeps asking Estragon if he remembers certain events.
Right.
And Estragon just, he can never quite recall.
Yeah, and it highlights not only that cyclical nature of their existence, but also the fallibility of memory, right? Like we think of memory as this concrete thing.
Right.
But Beckett reminds us that it's slippery, unreliable.
Absolutely. And then there's the dialogue itself, which, as you noted, is fragmented, often illogical. How did that strike you as you were reading the play?
It's like trying to assemble a puzzle, but there are pieces missing.
Right.
You're trying to make sense of it to follow the thread of the conversation, but it keeps breaking apart.
And that's precisely what Beckett's doing. He's deconstructing language to mirror this deconstruction of meaning in an absurd world.
Yeah.
He's showing us that language, our supposed tool for understanding, can also be a source of confusion, miscommunication.
It makes me think about all those times in real life where you have a conversation
Right?
and you walk away feeling like you didn't actually communicate anything meaningful.
Exactly. Beckett captures that feeling perfectly. The characters, they talk and talk,
Right.
but they never really seem to connect. They're isolated, not just physically, but emotionally, intellectually.
It's like they're speaking different languages.
Right.
Even though they're using the same words.
And then there are those moments of wordplay, those instances where meaning seems to just shift and dissolve right before our eyes. You pointed to Pozzo's blindness in your notes. Like, it's never quite clear if he's actually blind or just pretending.
It makes you question everything.
All
Like,
right.
is he telling the truth? Is there even a truth to tell?
It's like Beckett is saying that in an absurd world, truth is subjective, fluid, maybe even meaningless.
Which is a pretty unsettling thought, but also kind of liberating in a way.
Exactly. It frees us from these constraints of fixed meanings
Hmm.
and allows us to just kind of embrace the ambiguity, the uncertainty.
So, to sum it up, Beckett's use of language is not just about reflecting the absurdity of the world, but also about challenging our very understanding of language itself.
Precisely. He's making us work for it. He's forcing us to pay attention, to question not just the words on the page, but the very act of communication.
It's like he's inviting us to participate in this huge experiment, to play with language alongside him, to explore its possibilities and limitations.
And ultimately, to confront this kind of uncomfortable truth that maybe language, like life itself, is inherently absurd.
So, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. We've delved into the historical context, explored the themes, analyzed the characters, unpacked the language of Waiting for Godot.
We've really taken a deep dive into a world where nothing happens. Nobody comes, nobody goes.
Right.
But in that nothingness,
Hmm.
I think we found quite a bit of meaning, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been challenging, but rewarding. And I feel like I have a much deeper understanding, not only of the play, but also of the human condition, the absurdity of it all.
And that, I think, is the power of absurdist literature. It doesn't offer easy answers,
Mm.
but it offers this profound and lasting engagement with the fundamental questions of existence.
So for those listening, if you haven't already, I highly recommend picking up Waiting for Godot, reading it, seeing it performed.
It will stay with you, that's for
It
sure.
really will. It's a play that will stay with you long after the curtain falls. And maybe,
Yeah.
just maybe, it will inspire you to embrace the absurdities.
We'll laugh at the void.
Yeah.
And to keep searching for meaning, even if you never quite find it.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Samuel Beckett and Waiting for Godot. Until next time.